Hello for everyone. Today I will present the difference between two means of independent sample using the t-test. The independent sample t-test, they compare means of two independent sample groups in order to determine whether their statistical evidence that associated population means are significantly different. The independent sample t-test are parametric test. This test, also known as independent t-test or independent measure t-test. The variables using in this test are known as dependent variable or test variable, independent variable or grouping variable. T-test is commonly used to test the following statistical difference between the means of two groups, statistical difference between the means of two interventions, statistical difference between the means of two change scores. Testing the difference between two means with independent sample. For example, do the students in an accelerated program at a local high school have higher scores on the math portion of the CAT than their comrades? To test this claim, 100 students in the accelerated program and 100 students in the traditional program were sampled at the local high school. After taking the CAT, the students in the accelerated program had an average score of 590 with a standard deviation of 50, and the students in the traditional program had an average of 520 with standard deviation of 75 for the math portion of the test. Perform a test at the 1% level of significance. To test this claim, we are going to perform a test at the 1% level of significance. For this example, we are comparing two means whose samples are independent. Students in the traditional program are different from the students in the accelerated program. Thus, we have independent samples. So our first step is to identify the hypothesis. For the null hypothesis, we have μ1 is equal to μ2. Here we assuming that there is no difference between the two groups. For the alternative hypothesis, we are going to test μ1 is greater than μ2. We are using greater than symbol because we want to know if students in the accelerated program at the local high schools have higher scores on the math portion of the CAT than the comrades. So we are going to make group on the accelerated students, and the group 2 will be the traditional students. For the second step, we are going to identify the level of significance, and here alpha is equal to 0.01. For the third step, we are going to compute the test statistic using the values from scenario. Make note of the sample mean and the sample standard deviation for each group. Recall the accelerated students in group 1 and the traditional students are in group 2. Be careful not confuse the two groups. Therefore, the sample mean and the standard deviation for group 1 is 590 and the 50 respectively, and the sample mean and the standard deviation for group 2 is 520 and the 75 respectively, because we assume that there is no significance between the two groups for the null hypothesis. μ1 minus μ2 will be always equal to 0. So, for the test statistic, we have the following formula. Once we plug in the values from the scenario, we obtain the following: μ minus μ2 is equal to 0. After computing, the test statistic is equal to 7.77. For step 4, we're going to determine the critical value. Follows a t-distribution, we're going to use t-distribution table, and we can determine the rejection region. And the area will be in the right tail of the distribution, because we have a right tail test. The shaded area is alpha, which is 0.01. Since we using the t-distribution, we also have degrees of freedom. The degrees of freedom for this left is the smaller of n1 minus 1 or n2 minus 1, since both of the sample size were the same. We can determine that the degrees of freedom 99 by looking at the t-table and looking 99 degrees of freedom. We determine the critical value to be 2.33. Our test statistic of 7.77 falls in the rejection region and reject the null hypothesis. For step 5, we can state the decision and the conclusion. Reject hypothesis, we can state there is sufficient evidence to suggest that the students in an accelerated program at a local high school have higher scores on the math portion of the CAT than the comrades. So thank you for your attention, and I think that my video was very understandable for you.